The topography of Africa is formed by some unique conditions that derive from the breakup of Pangaea 160 million years ago. As this slide indicates, the major continents of the New World, North and South America, as well as Australia, India, and Afghanistan, all broke off from the remaining core that now makes up Africa, leaving behind a high, flat plateau with steep escarpments on all sides, but no long mountain chain as was formed in the Americas by the collision of the North American and South American plates with the Pacific Ocean. Instead, Africa has this profile, as indicated in this slide, a ring of steep escarpments running off the eastern, western, and southern edges of the continent. Therefore, the topography is not marked by mountain chains, but is indicated here by two features. First, in the east, a rift or break in the eastern portion of the continent, the Great Rift Valley, which runs from the Bekaa Valley of Lebanon in the north all the way down through the Jordan River, the Dead Sea, the Red Sea, and through East Africa all the way to Swaziland. And in the southern and central portions of the continent, large basins formed by sedimentary deposits and ringed by long river systems that flow from the center of the continent in a large circle and then plunge over the edge of the escarpment into the sea. This is characteristic, for example, of the Congo River Basin, pictured here, which, as you can see, runs in a long arc from south to north and then west to east before plunging over this escarpment into the South Atlantic Ocean. The lower Congo, therefore, is dominated not by a broad alluvial plain that might support a major agricultural society, but rather by rough rapids. This is familiar to anyone who's read Joseph Conrad's Heart of Darkness, where the protagonist in Conrad's novel lands first at the mouth of the Congo and then has to advance overland up the escarpment to what is called Stanley's Pool, where he picks up a steamship that takes him up the Congo into Central Africa. But he cannot reach the upper Congo sailing from the Atlantic Ocean. A similar situation dominates the Niger River in West Africa, which again begins in this large arc through a sedimentary basin in the interior of West Africa and then plunges down over the escarpment, forming not a broad alluvial plain that would support agriculture, but a dense swamp, the so-called Niger River Delta. Notice how different the lower Congo and lower Niger are from, for example, the lower Nile, which floods its banks, creating a large, broad flood zone that supports major agricultural development. That absence of an alluvial plain on the major African rivers is going to preclude the rise of civilization in these areas and direct African civilization elsewhere. Secondly, let's look at the climate of Africa. You'll notice in this slide that Africa is divided first by the equator in the central part of the continent, which produces a low pressure zone of warm, moist, rising air whose moisture condenses and falls as a heavy rainfall in the central part of the continent. But this heavy rainfall in the center tapers off toward the extraordinarily dry zones marked by the subtropical high pressure areas at 30 degrees north and 30 degrees south. As a consequence of this rainfall distribution, which is illustrated in this slide, we see heavy rainfall in the center, tapering toward very dry systems at the northern and southern extremes of the continent, marked by the Sahara Desert in the north and the Kalahari Desert in the south. This topographical feature, that is to say, a large, relatively flat plateau with steep sides and no long mountain chain, and a rainfall pattern of wet in the center, tapering toward dry at both ends, creates a similar tapering vegetation regime. As illustrated here, we have dense rainforest at the center of the continent, then tapering through increasingly dry zones. Looking at some pictures of this regime, we see first of all in the center of the continent a rainforest. Then as we move further away from the center, either north or south, we get what's called in the African context a savanna, which is a mixed grass prairie and with low trees and shrubs. And then finally into a very dry Sahel, or what we would call shortgrass prairie, and then finally into the desert. This vegetation regime will define the politics of all of the countries spread out along this transition zone between wet and dry.